Hi everyone, it's Mr. Sinti, and I'm happy today to talk to you about the male reproductive system. The interesting thing about the male reproductive system right out of the gate is that we all are here because of it, because our fathers produced sperm, and that sperm united with our mother's egg and fertilized us into ourselves, and so we have to give credit to that, so it's very important. Although, that being said, you know what's really curious about the reproductive systems, both male and female, is that it's the only system in the body that I can think of that is not required for yourself to survive. It's kind of interesting. It's needed for the population to keep going, obviously, but it's not required to survive. So in other words, we don't have to reproduce per se to survive. And so today's conversation is all about the male reproductive system. So let's jump right into that. And so let's take a look. And so one of the first things that I'll say about the male reproductive system is that, as you can see here, is sort of a side view of the male body. Some of the organs of the male reproductive system are internal and some are external. So that's right out of the gate. And so the function of the system is to produce sperm, and sperm, which is the male gamete cell, are produced here in the testes, or testicle for singular. There's two of them. There's one over on the other side, but you're only seeing one. And so that occurs during the process of meiosis, if you remember that. It's a special type of division of the cell so that it takes the normal diploid 46 chromosomes down to 23. And then there's a series of tubes and glands that are going to take the sperm back inside the body, and some glands are going to secrete some fluids, and then all of that is going to be ejaculated out of the male reproductive system through the urethra, which is enclosed in the penis, and that's going to enter into the female reproductive tract, and there you go, fertilization. So fertilization is going to occur in the female, so that'll be a future discussion. But what's really interesting about the male is that some of these secretions in the glands anticipate fertilization, and so we'll talk about that. So pretty cool. So first thing I want to say about it is the primary reproductive organ of the male, primary gonad, if you will, reproductive organ is the testes. And so this is the location of sperm production right in here. And it also produces many male hormones. Male hormones are called androgens, but probably the most common one that you're familiar with is testosterone. And so this is the primary organ, and then everything else is sort of accessory, sort of supportive of that main goal. The testes are located on the outside of the body, and they're enclosed in this thin sac-like structure called the scrotum. There. And so here's a cross-section of the male reproductive system. Here you can see the urinary bladder, and the ureter is taking urine from the kidneys down into the bladder. And what's interesting about this is that normally what occurs, I say normally most of the time, is that the bladder then releases urine. Let me sort of track it like this. I'll make it yellow for urine. So here's the, let's see, let me get a pen on there. Hold on. So normally what happens is here's the urine inside the urinary bladder, and then that gets moved down this tube called the urethra. And that urethra then exits the body through the penis, and so that's urine right there. But what's interesting, what we're talking about is sperm production, and so the sperm are going to be produced down here in the testicles. And we'll look at that process. And then they're going to move up to this structure called the epididymis, where they're going to mature and really develop their ability to swim with their protein-like tails called flagella. And then they're going to travel up into the body through this very long, thin tube called the vas deferens, or the ductus deferens. And so this comes across here, and there's two of those because there's one over on the other side. So we're only seeing one. As you can see down here, it's happening sort of simultaneously. There's sperm being produced here, and they're traveling up. Sperm being produced here, and they're traveling up this way. So now we're back into the male body. So they're going to come around, and the sperm itself are going to be introduced to some fluid that are produced by a variety of glands. One of the glands is the seminal vesicle. There's two of those. Here, this is a cool posterior from the backside view of the urinary bladder. You can see the seminal vesicles here and here, and they're going to secrete some fluid. And then that's going to meet up with some fluid from the prostate gland, which is sort of this golf ball size gland right below the urinary bladder. And so this little area that goes from the vas deferens through the prostate gland is called the ejaculatorial duct. And so here you have sperm mixing in with seminal fluids and prostate fluids, and collectively all the fluid is referred to as semen. And then that travels out the urethra into the female body right there. And so we're about to look at that process in detail, but that's a good overview. So again, let's look at some anatomy. Here I mentioned a few of these organs before. You're familiar with the urinary bladder that's capable of extending itself because it has that transitional epithelial right there. And then you can see here, see this bone right here in the front of sort of anterior in the body? This is called the pubic bone right in here. And so that's why sometimes at puberty, the result of male hormone testosterone results in chest hair or underarm hair and facial hair. It also results in some hair growth right in the skin, sort of right above the reproductive organs, and it's known as pubic hair because it's based off of that bone right there. The urethra is the tube that's going to allow urine and semen to be expelled to the outside of the body. Now, these two, inside the penis, there's two special kinds of tissues that I'll be talking about a little bit later in the video. Kind of cool names. Look at this. Corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum. Corpus is sort of a word you might be familiar with. It means body. Like Corpus Christi means body of Christ. Or a corpse is a dead body, corpse. But so it's a body that is cavernous and a body that's spongy-like. And what's interesting, I think you might be familiar with this, is the fact that blood vessels, there's a lot of blood vessels in this corpus tissue. And what's interesting is that it fills up during arousal, and the blood gets caught into that tissue, and it's sort of like a sponge that's filling up with water. It expands and elongates, and the penis becomes erect. Right here it's considered to be flaccid, so it's not doing much. But the penis has to be erect in order to enter into the female body. That's fairly crucial. And here's the penis in general. So the penis is the organ that delivers the semen into the reproductive organ. It gets a lot of attention, but the real primary organ is over here, the testes, because that's where sperm is being produced and that's where testosterone is being produced. And then here, this sort of enlarged area of the corpus spongiosum is called the glans penis, no D, glans penis. It's enlarged there, and it's covered by skin. Obviously it would. The skin is very thin on the penis, and as it comes on top of the glands, it's considered to be prepuce or foreskin. And then we'll talk about this a little bit later, is sometimes parents will choose to have their son's prepuce or foreskin removed in a process called circumcision. So that's literally cut off, and so then the outside of the gland's penis is exposed, and that's called a circumcised penis. And then here we have the vas deferens again, coming around. Here's the vas deferens. Sort of emphasize that. Vas deferens, you can sort of follow that. It's coming up here, epididymis, coming around the urinary bladder, and then again, here we have the seminal vesicle, and then the ejaculatorial duct right there, the prostate. And then this little tiny gland is kind of interesting. It's got a big, for such a little gland, it's got a big name. It's Bulbourethral Glands. Sometimes it's known as Cowper's. Let me just write that, Cowper's. It's a little bit easier to say, the Cowper's gland. Now what does it do? The Cowper's gland produces sort of a lubricant mucus, which then somewhat, not significantly, somewhat lubricates the external structure of the penis, which helps intercourse. But really the main mucus lubrication for intercourse is being provided by the female. But it's kind of an interesting gland nevertheless. And then these other structures are not related to the reproductive system. You're probably familiar with them. Okay, so let's look at the testes first, since they're the primary organ. The testes are sort of like in shape of an egg. They're sort of oval like this, and they're contained within this skin-like structure called the scrotum. Interesting to note about the scrotum is that it holds the testes away from the body. And what's curious about this is that we've discovered that the sperm are rather sensitive to temperature. And so they like the temperature. The internal body temperature for everyone is 37 degrees Celsius. So they kind of like it just a little bit below that, because they're on the outside of the body, just slightly below that. But if it does get cold out, or if the male is swimming, for example, in a cold swimming pool or a cold shower or something, the testes can actually be drawn up because the scrotum contracts, and so the testes get held closer to the body and then warm up. Likewise, if the person is in a hot tub or a warm swimming pool or a warm bath, or it's just very, very hot outside, the scrotum will relax a little bit and will allow the testes to sort of dangle down a little bit further away from the body, and then cools them off. And so here's sort of an external look at the scrotum, and there's it's the sac that holds the two testes right here. What's interesting is that this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but in terms of when couples are having infertility problems, sometimes the physician will ask, what's the story with the guy in terms of what kind of underwear or what kind of pants is the guy wearing? Because if he's wearing very tight underwear, very tight pants of some kind, it could be actually holding the scrotum too close to the body, and just that few degrees temperature increase can actually prevent the sperm from developing properly and therefore result in infertility. And so there's sort of a suggestion to wear loose-fitting pants or boxers. Kind of funny. So here, kind of a shocker, but here's the actual picture of the scrotum, and inside are the two testes right here. And this is some of the hair coming down from the pubic area. So this is what the testes looks like if you remove the scrotum right there. And so this upper area is called the epididymis right here. But it doesn't look like much of anything. What's really the heart of the testes is what's going on inside. And so if you were to be able to cut the testes in half and take a look at that, it's separated by connective tissue. These little septum come and separate it into these little lobules. And these lobules right here contain many coils of thin tubes, and they're called seminiferous tubes. And these seminiferous tubules are the site of sperm production, and so that's really important. I'm going to emphasize that. So seminiferous tubules are the site of sperm production. So sperm are being produced inside the seminiferous tubules right there. And so let's take a look at the seminiferous tubules up close. And so take a look at this. Inside, there's coils and coils and coils of seminiferous tubules, and it sort of reminds me of the intestines. Since they're so convoluted, you can get more in there and therefore more surface area. And so inside the tubes are where the sperm are being produced. So you start from this outer cell, and this is where meiosis is taking place right here. You start from a cell with 46 chromosomes, and you're coming down to a cell with 23. Or in other words, you're going from a diploid cell to a haploid cell. And that's where the sperm are produced. And then they travel through those tubes, all the way up here into they're carried to the epididymis here. There's channels right there that lead up into the epididymis. And this is where the sperm are sort of hanging out. This is their little dorm where they're living right in here, and they're maturing until they're called upon to be ejaculated. Now, they don't live forever, so they're sort of temporary. Now this is going on all the time. Sperm production is happening on a moment-to-moment basis in a male. Ever since puberty, the male has been producing sperm daily, and so there's a lot of them, and they're needed. And so here's a close-up. Look at this. This is a close-up. Let me circle it. It's a close-up of one seminiferous tubule like that. Here's another one like that, and there's another one like that. So there's these tubes. These are cut in half. So here's a cell that's diploid, 2N, and it's going to go through the process of meiosis, if you remember that from biology. I hope so. It'll produce haploid sperm cells like this, 4 of them, right there, and that's what you're seeing right in here inside the seminiferous tubercles. But what I want to mention is, check this out. These cells right here are not the cells in between the seminiferous tubercles. It's like these cells are pretty significant also. Even though they're not producing sperm, they're called interstitial cells, and they lie in between the seminiferous tubercles. These interstitial cells are really critical because they're the ones that are producing the male hormone testosterone and a variety of other isomers of testosterone, a variety of androgens. So testosterone being the most popular one. So the interstitial cells are the ones producing testosterone. And one of the functions of testosterone is to stimulate male production of sperm, or stimulate meiosis, or stimulate spermatogenesis. You like that word? Like the making of sperm, spermatogenesis. And so here's a really cool shot of the interstitial cells. They're the cells in between the seminiferous tubercles. And then here's a good cross-section of the testy. You can see here the different lobules here, and then look at all that seminiferous tubercles contained inside. So there's a lot of potential for sperm production, even in just one testy. And so take a look here. I'm going to show you over here this little tiny video clip of spermatogenesis. I think it's really cool. You'll like it. And so notice here in this video, the one diploid cell divides through mitosis to produce 2 diploid cells, 46, but then follow this one. This one's going to be meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. It's called the primary spermatocyte. Don't get too caught up with all the terminology, but it produces, after the first meiotic division, it produces the secondary spermatocyte. So each of these have 23 chromosomes into them. And so now you have haploid cells, if you remember your meiosis. So the homologous chromosomes have separated. So at this point, meiosis 2 is basically mitosis. And so let's let that play out. So meiosis 2, the second meiotic division, produces 4 cells, and these cells are called spermatids, and they're not quite mature yet. And what's interesting is, check that out. Do you notice how their cytoplasm is sort of being shed right here? The nucleus is going to be contained in the head of the sperm. And then what's most important about the cytoplasm at this point, other than, the most important thing is the nucleus, which has the 23 chromatids in there. But what's really important for the sperm to have is mitochondria. Let me just sort of illustrate that. So if you remember, little mitochondria are these organelles that produce energy, or ATP. The sperm really need a lot of production of ATP. Let me just write that. Because in order for their flagella to beat, you may recall this from our discussion of the muscular system, the phosphates from the ATP stick on to proteins which cause a conformational change, which causes the flagella to beat. And so ultimately, that is pretty crucial. So here's our sperm. They go on the inside of the seminiferous tubercle, which is called the lumen, or the space, and there you have it. So this is where sperm are being produced. In the inside of the seminiferous tubercle, it's called spermatogenesis. I like that video. It's a good one. And so let's go back over here, if we can, back to the slides. Raise that up and come over here. So here's a picture of real sperm, and there they are swimming around. They're not in motion, but normally they would be beating. This is under the light microscope. And you can see here is the head where the DNA is located in the flagella. And this sort of midpiece, you see it right here, is where the mitochondria are located. So the sperm head has haploid nucleus, 23. But what's really cool about the sperm is, check this out, is this midpiece has a lot of mitochondria, as I mentioned before, but the head part of the sperm not only contains the nucleus where the DNA is. So basically it's like a dart. It's sort of just a small cell with a big tail that's going to transport the male or your father's genetic material to the female. But it's got this little cap. Do you notice this? It's called the acrosome. And this acrosomal cap is a combination of a variety of proteins, And some of those proteins are enzymes. And what's really cool about that is that these enzymes in the acrosomal cap are needed in order to fertilize the egg. That'll come up in a future conversation, because without that acrosomal cap and those enzymes, you wouldn't be able to break through the egg membrane and fertilize the egg. So it's really, really interesting, I find. And so this is, again, cross-section. If I were to draw it out completely like this, this is the seminiferous tubercle like that. It's a circle. Do you notice here, here's the wall of the seminiferous tubercle, and here's the inner space, if I go like that. So there you are. So meiosis is occurring here. So it's mitosis, and then meiosis will create those haploid cells, and then the spermatids, and then they develop into the mature sperm on the inside. And then they move through the seminiferous tubercles to the epididymis. And then once they are stored in the epididymis, then we're going to go inside the body. So this conversation now is about the internal organs. So we're going to go from the epididymis up the vas deferens. And so let's check that out. And so here's the epididymis, the real epididymis. So I don't know, in terms of size, the testicle itself, the length of the testicle is just a little over 3 centimeters. It's approximately the same size as the ovary. And over on the side here is the epididymis, and it's adjacent to the testicle itself, and it's the site of where the sperm mature and develop into good swimmers. And so the vas deferens I mentioned before is this long tube, about 45 centimeters, so that's fairly significant. It's about half a meter in length. It goes all the way down from the bottom of the epididymis all the way back into the male body, wrap around the bladder, and then it ends up terminating at the prostate gland. And sort of turns into the ejaculatorial duct, which is right in here, this area right here. This is considered to be the urethra, right in here, that part. And so it unites and it empties into the urethra. And so what I want to say about the vas deferens, other than the fact that it is a tube that conducts the sperm into the male body, is that some men like to have their vas deferens cut and tied off as sort of a, quote, permanent contraception. And so if a couple, for example, decides that they don't want to have any more children, they can go in for a sort of a quick procedure. So a little Novocaine is injected into the scrotum to sort of numb the area, and then a small incision is made. And then with a little tiny hook, the doctor can grab the vas deferens, or raise it up like this, make an incision, in other words, cut it, and then tie it off. And so it becomes you have to do that on the other side as well. But it becomes a physical barrier to the sperm, and that's known as a vasectomy, if you've heard of that before. And so here it is. You pull out the vas deferens, a little incision is made in the scrotum, and then here is the vas deferens being cut, and then it's being sutured right in there, and then it's tied off, and then you're good to go. And so it provides a physical barrier for the sperm. So what's interesting about this, sometimes people have questions about this. Can the man still have an erection? Of course. Is the man still producing semen? Of course, because the main volume of what semen is the glandular fluid being produced by the seminiferous, the prostate gland and seminiferous, not seminiferous tubercles, but seminal vesicles. That's the bulk of the fluid. And so the sperm, though there's many, don't constitute a lot of volume, and so the male is still able to produce semen, and without the sperm, then it's a form of birth control, because you won't be able to get pregnant without the sperm, of course. So seminal vesicles are these two little glands right here. This is a posterior look at the male bladder, and it's really neat. This is the vas deferens coming here, so the sperm, let me go here with the sperm. Sperm are traveling here in this direction. They're coming up, and they're coming in this direction like this. And so what's interesting is this seminal vesicle fluid is emptying into here and meeting in like a little river, entering in here. And so this contains a lot of fluid, and then this travels right through the prostate gland. And so these are glands, and whenever we say glands, the cells that make up a gland are specialized for secreting. And so what do they secrete? And so the seminal vesicles secrete a alkaline. And if you remember this from chemistry, alkaline means sort of a basic pH, in other words, above 7. So 8, 9, alkaline fluid. Now, why would they do that? Why would you produce this sort of slippery, soap-like alkaline fluid? Well, it's thought that one of the functions is that when the semen enters into the female body, the birth canal is a kind of acidic location. And without that, the sperm would be kind of torched by that acid environment. And so this alkaline fluid sort of neutralizes an anticipation of the female reproductive system. I find that's kind of neat. The prostate gland also produces alkaline fluids as well. And then one of the claim to fame of the seminal vesicle is that it produces a sugary solution, fructose. So, what's that all about? Why is there sugar being produced by the seminal vesicles? Why do the sperm need sugar? Well, if you're following the conversation from before, you'll know that the sperm need a lot of energy to power their flagella. So where are they going to get all that sugar for their mitochondria to burn? And it's going to come from the fructose from the seminal vesicles. So the semen is rather sugary. And then, third, I find this interesting too, that there's a little bit of prostaglandins. And the prostaglandins are these hormone-like chemicals that act locally. And what they do is, when they go inside the birth canal and the semen is sort of deposited at the base of the cervix, it causes a little bit of muscular contraction in the female reproductive tract, which helps to propel the sperm through past the cervix and into the uterus. Now, that's pretty cool. So some of this fluid that's being produced by the male is anticipating where the sperm is going. Seminal vesicles. Well, the prostate gland gets a lot of attention. I think people know it because of the fact that sometimes, sadly enough, that there's a high incidence of prostate cancer. And if there's a cancer here, it can be very dangerous. The cells will divide through mitosis, and what will happen is, since it's right below the bladder, it gives the male sort of the tendency to want to urinate frequently. And that isn't the problem as much, and it's hard to empty the bladder out. And so there's kind of a trickle of urine instead of a stream of urine. But the real issue is that those cells can metastasize and get around through the rest of the body and could be fatal if it's not treated. And so what does the prostate gland do? Do you notice here's the seminal vesicle, and here's the urethra, here's the ejaculatorial duct right there. So what's it doing? It's also secreting a milky alkaline fluid. And that helps, again, to neutralize the acidic environment of the reproductive tract and helps the sperm with a little bit of their mobility in their swimming. And so, again, this is a physician who is practicing prostate cancer and trying to prevent this. They can look, and this looks pretty brutal. This is a scope that's going into the urethra via the penis. You can actually enter into the prostate gland and sort of look around there with a camera to see what's going on. And then you can even enter in from below here. This is even below the scrotum. You can make an incision right in here. Look how swollen this area is. That's not really normal. That might be the result of cancer, and then the cancer cells can be removed this way. So that's pretty brutal. You don't want that. And so I mentioned this gland before, this Cowper's gland. It's small, right over here. Let me highlight it so you can see it sitting right there. It's sitting, and anatomically, it's below the prostate. And it enters in right there. It has its own little duct. It enters into the urethra. And it produces a little bit of mucus right there. That's what it's doing. Cowper's gland. And so here's sort of a review of the whole thing. Here's the testes where the sperm are produced. Here's the epididymis. You travel up the vas deferens, around the bladder, seminal vesicles, here's the semen coming through the prostate. The prostate gland mixes in its fluids, the Cowper's gland, and then all of that semen is transported through the urethra out of the penis into the female body. And so there's a picture of the sperm, and the fluid that they're swimming in is considered to be semen. So it's a collection of seminal vesicle fluid and prostate fluids. So per milliliter. So let's talk about the numbers for a second. It's kind of interesting. Let's say that anywhere between 5 and 7 milliliters are ejaculated, in other words, released from the male body. So if there's 7 milliliters per milliliter, there's 120 million sperm per milliliter. So hundreds of millions of sperm are being produced and released in one ejaculation. So that should tell you something, that there's a high likelihood that if this is happening, that you're going to become pregnant. That's one thing. And then it should also tell you that there's probably a lot of things that can go wrong. So in other words, not a lot of the sperm are making it, because it really requires only one to fertilize the egg. So apparently you need these incredible numbers, because a lot of them don't make the journey. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about fertilization. So then finally, the external reproductive structures, we talked a little bit already about the scrotum, the testes, and the penis. And there's a sort of a computer rendering of the process here. You can see the pubic hairs. You can't really look inside the scrotum like that, but that's what it would look like otherwise. This is a picture of a circumcised penis right there, because you can see the glands right there. And so inside the penis, I mentioned before, what's interesting about it is, see right down below here, this tube, this is the urethra. It sort of looks like I don't know, like an angry monkey or something like this. But these two tissues right up here are corpora or corpus cavernosa. And see how spongy it is? See all these little caverns right there? And then spongiosum. So there's almost two rod-like structures like this on the top of the penis that are going in this direction. Now what are these holes up here? This is a vein. These are two arteries that are over here. And what happens is when blood comes in like this to the penis, blood comes in, and now why would blood be coming in? Because the male is aroused, and that causes the blood vessels to dilate. And what happens is when the blood comes in, it fills up these caverns, and so the penis elongates, and it becomes so stiff as a result of the blood going in that it actually physically blocks, and sort of like it presses on the blood vessels or the veins that drain the penis of the blood, so it remains elongated. That's kind of interesting, and that's called an erection. And so this is kind of a shot of this. You can see here how the blood is filling up into these caverns right here. And you can see here is the blood vessels entering in. So the blood swells up into the penis, becomes enlarged. And it's this tube right here, the urethra, where the semen is coming out right there. And so this increased blood flow causes the erection. So without that, you wouldn't be able to have intercourse. So it's crucial. And so here is another picture of it. It's kind of a funny cartoon, but it shows how the blood enters in, blood's entering in, the tissue gets swollen because of all the blood that's in there. Then that actually constricts the blood from exiting, and so the blood remains inside the penis, and so therefore if it remains inside, it elongates and stiffens. And so I mentioned that circumcision. If you don't mind, I'm going to show you a couple pictures of this. You can grab, this is a physician here, you can grab the foreskin or the prepuce and you can pull it away from the glands. You can drag it out, sort of like a turtleneck sweater being pulled over a person's head. And then you can cut the turtleneck sweater and then it falls down. And that's what a circumcision is. I know, sorry about that analogy. So you probably will never wear a turtleneck again. But so this is the foreskin is pulled up and then it's cut. And then what you see here is the circumcised penis right here. And so this is how, over here, this is an uncircumcised. In other words, this is the way all males are born, with the foreskin covering this. This is what it looks like. And you're like, well, why would you have a circumcised penis? This is a whole nother conversation. At first, it was related to sort of religious practice and as sort of identifying Jewish individuals from non. And then it became a conversation about, well, it's difficult to maintain proper hygiene. Sometimes there's little dirt that accumulates in there, and there's some lint and some, especially in little kids that are not cleaning properly. Sometimes there's increased urinary tract infections. Even in adults, sometimes studies have shown that there's increased opportunity for sexually transmitted diseases that get caught up in an uncircumcised penis. But there's, for every one study that says that, there's another that contradicts that. And so it comes down to the couple. If you have a boy, the physician's going to ask you, it's an elective procedure, and they're going to ask you if you want that penis to be circumcised or not. And so this is what it looks like when it's circumcised. This is uncircumcised. So basically, it's your call on that. I can't really say that one is better than the other. So it's between it's between the couple. And so it's a little bit sad because obviously the baby doesn't like it, and the baby's crying. And then do you notice here that's got like this sort of neosporin antibacterial lubricant on there to make sure that there's no infection? And so there's a little bit of sensitivity there for a couple of days, and especially when you're putting the diaper and the diaper sticks to the it's not good, just saying. And so finally, when a term to describe the semen traveling through the male, inside the male body, is called emission. It's the movement of the sperm through the male inside of the body, and then when the sperm is released to the outside, it's called ejaculation. So when it's being released, it's ejaculation, and then this is emission. Now, one thing about emission is that the semen, in the act of sexual intercourse, emission is occurring. So in other words, the sperm is hanging out right here in the urethra. And so just the nature of sexual reproduction, sometimes just as a result, it's hard to phrase this, as a result of just sexual intercourse, some of the semen will actually leak out into the female body without the full ejaculation. And sometimes a male will say that that's a great form of birth control, that they'll be able to pull the penis out before they ejaculate and everything's fine. It's not fine. Just a little bit of that semen, if you remember the numbers a little bit before, just a milliliter contains over 100 million sperm. It's not a good form of birth control. It's called coitus interruptus. It's kind of funny. I think that's Latin. So it's like sex interrupted. Not a good birth control. Now, orgasm is an interesting thing, difficult to describe, but as the sperm is ejaculated out of the male penis, it's accompanied by this sort of really pleasing sensation called an orgasm. It's kind of, if I were to describe it, it's kind of like if somebody was tickling the skin, like tickle, tickle. It's kind of pleasurable but annoying at the same time, tickle, 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 and then it's accompanied by like a big sneeze. If you've ever had a sneeze where you've released a lot of mucus, it's kind of satisfying. So it's a tickle, tickle accompanied by a large sneeze. Sorry about that, but that's what it is. But it's a big motivator because it's such a pleasurable feeling that that you have to know, and this is a whole nother psychological discussion. You have to know that motivates individuals to want to have sex and therefore procreate more. And so it's a good carrot, if you will. And then finally, I thought this was kind of funny right here. After the penis is ejaculated, it'll basically the erection will go away and it'll return to its flaccid state. But I thought this was kind of funny. Ejaculation, sort of like a fire drill, the sperm skull. All right, I hope you enjoyed watching the male reproductive system. Thanks.